All right. The death of George Floyd, according to New York Times, reignited a movement. So what happens now? Well, it is safe to say that the murder trial of this killer cop, Derek Chauvin, was and is at the center of this national reckoning on race and policing. But of course, it's way beyond that. Race and policing is an immediate, horrific issue. But these cycles of protest over systemic racism and policing, they're not anything new. They really aren't. But over the past 11 months, these calls for racial justice has touched just about every aspect of American life. And some historians say it has touched American life on a scale that hasn't happened since the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But if we use the civil rights movement of the 1960s as the template or a touchstone about what is happening now, what is, I mean, what? I was here in the 60s. I remember Lyndon Johnson signing Civil Rights Act in 1964, was it? 65? I remember all that. I was in the South. I was in Savannah, Georgia. I was in Jacksonville, Florida. I was in Atlanta. I was in Raleigh, Tampa, Biloxi, all over the South. And I asked myself, what has changed in the past 55 years? Oh, well, Mike, come on, for Christ's sake. Black folk can go to Woolworth's lunch counter now and have a chicken sandwich. Yeah, but there aren't any Woolworth's lunch counters now, right? Okay. Oh, well, black folk can ride in the front of a bus. Give me a fucking break. All right, well, black people can walk into a mall. Come on. Equal Accommodations, Public Accommodations Act, whatever it was called, tried to bring down a barrier. And in a sense, in an economic sense, okay, it did. It allowed the big retailers more of a market to sell shit to. Okay, that's good, right? That's a good thing. But the civil rights movement of the 1960s, compared to now, what an embarrassment. What an embarrassment. What a shock. If you're white, if you want to stop and assess where we were prior to the signing of those civil rights acts in the 60s to where we are now, and if you can do that and not feel like a goddamn fool, like you have been put in a joke bag, like somebody tricked the shit out of you. What? I thought, nuh-uh. Black folk know this. It's we whites. So yesterday, this racist cop was convicted of 2 counts of murder, 1 count of manslaughter. And sure, the verdict brought some kind of solace to activists for racial justice who have been watching this drama, this courtroom drama, since it began several weeks ago. But the way the New York Times puts it, the verdict brought some solace to activists for racial justice. I mean, that's a pretty narrow group, isn't it? Or maybe it isn't. What did I just say? Millions of white people took to the streets over the summer. But are all those millions of white people really activists for racial justice? I guess we're going to find out fairly quickly, aren't we? But meanwhile, for many black Americans, real change has got to feel elusive and slippery and just can't quite get a hold of it. Particularly if you consider how relentlessly the killing of black men by the police has continued, including that recent shooting of young Dante Wright, 10 miles away from where the trial of Derek Chauvin was occurring, while the trial was occurring. And then, of course, the white Christian fascists in this country are now working overtime. Bullshit on this. You can already see the backlash. There's legislation going on in a number of states right now that are controlled by the Christian fascists that would reduce voting access. It's already a fait accompli here in Georgia. Reduce voting access. Protect the cops. Criminalize public protests. All that shit is going on right now in Republican-controlled state legislatures around the country. I have to, oh shit. I have to consider sometimes, and I have a difficult time considering what I'm about to say. But what I'm about to say is this. Are we white people this goddamn stupid? Remember, ignorance is curable. Stupid is terminal and fatal. Are we this stupid? That our white Christian-dominated ultra-conservative legislatures are now just working like a bunch of little goddamn gophers, just busy to pass new laws to further impose restrictions on sharing and democracy against black people? I mean, what the fuck? This is the part that is really affecting me today. Okay, let me quote some people here in the Times. Otis Moss III, he's pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. And he said to call what has happened over the past year a racial reckoning is not right. I'm not talking about the verdict. I'm talking about what has happened over the past year. This is what Otis Moss III said, quote, "Reckoning suggests that we are truly struggling with how to reimagine everything from criminal justice to food deserts to health disparities, but we're not doing that. Today's guilty verdict is addressing a symptom, but we have not yet dealt with the disease," end quote. Otis Moss III, I guess it's Reverend Otis, he's a pastor. And moments before the verdict was announced, Derek Johnson, who's the president of the NAACP, called George Floyd's death, quote, "a Selma, Alabama moment for America," end quote. So what happened in Selma, Alabama in 1965? Surely to God, you know. But that march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with the world watching, it demonstrated the need for the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's the one that when Lyndon Johnson signed it, he said the Democratic Party has just lost the South. And he was right. There are no Democrats in control of the South anymore. Well, okay, Virginia, which is a very important, the absolute center of the Confederacy. But the legislatures in the states here in the South, yeah, they were lost in 1965 with the signing. It took a while, but eventually the state legislatures in the South and the governorships and the senators and representatives were going to be white people who were racist son of a bitches. Now there have been a few changes. Look what happened here in Georgia. We have 2 Democratic senators. Hip, hip, hooray. Now, lest you think I am totally with Jason Johnson, Dr. Johnson, on this issue. Let me say I'm 98% in agreement with what he said. But there's a little 2% of me that recognizes that in the months since George Floyd's death, some changes have been concrete. There have been all sorts of policing reform laws introduced at the state level in various states. Corporations pledged billions to racial equity causes. The NFL, my God, the NFL apologized for its failure to support protests against police violence. Protests that was conducted by the NFL's black players. Even the backlash was different. As the Times reports, racist statements by dozens of public officials, from mayors to fire chiefs, related to Mr. Floyd's death, perhaps tolerated before, cost these people their jobs and sent others to anti-racism training. Anti-racism training. Son of a bitch. See, that's what I was talking about the other day, re-education camps. Anti-racism training. How do you do that? How do you take from white folk? I know what I'm talking about now. Don't question what I'm talking about because I am white. How do you take from when I make comments about black consciousness this or black experience that, I'm only doing it from a head level, intellectual level. But when I talk about white issues, I know what I'm talking about. Okay? Okay. The anti-racism training, so-called, how do you do that? We whites have had our entire lives saturated in racism. I used to get into these nasty-ass arguments with people when I used to do talk radio. When I would bring up this topic. And white people would call in and they would be so furious because I referred to white people as being racist. I'm not a racist. And I would try to explain that I wasn't holding them responsible for their racism, but by God damn, they were racist just as I was. It's a learned condition, and the learning, the schooling on how to be a racism starts, if you're white, immediately, as soon as you're born. As soon as you're born, because you are born in a facility, if you're white, that for the most part is so much more conducive to a healthy birth than if you are born where mostly black people go. So from the moment you first squawk when you come out of your mother's insides, if you're white, it's already started in on you. How do you explain that to people? Well, I found out over the course of a 35-year-long radio career, or 30-year-long radio career, that you can't. You can't explain that. People have to come to that awareness, white people do, on their own. Something has to happen. Something has to shake loose inside our heads, where we finally can go, oh my God, holy shit, I had no idea. Oh, what? Oh God, really? I'm part of that? Yeah. Yeah. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. As you know, we've switched formats and are now broadcast exclusively on the Progressive Voices Network. So that means you get fewer program interruptions, no corporate commercials, and lots of profanity. But our format change also means some of our radio listeners no longer hear the program. It's been a while since I mentioned our podcasts, so you may have forgotten that there is a way to listen to this program anytime you need a good dose of screaming. Visit MikeMalloy.com and subscribe to our podcasts. As a podcast subscriber, you can download the program to your mobile device and take me with you wherever you go. And if you have a friend who needs a dose of truth-seeking, you can give a gift subscription as well. That's MikeMalloy.com, and never miss a minute of the uncensored fun and frivolity.